Hello and welcome to Henry Weston's Old Mate, the podcast. Welcome back. This is episode 4. I'm your host, Phil Walton. You're all very welcome. Good to have listeners back again. I'm here again with Stu Butler. Good evening, Stu.
Good evening, Phil. I've just seen you wearing that shirt, mate.
I know. We were just having that discussion, weren't we, about shall we try and blag it and make it sound like we've got together on yet another evening and all the rest of it. But listeners and viewers would see through that, and actually, from the quality of the podcast, we were talking about stuff that was really quite deep in the last podcast, and to keep the momentum, I think we needed to stay on track rather than give it a few days to cool down, because I think it wouldn't do the subject any justice if we had that break. So we've ended the first recording and jumped straight onto the second one. We will go straight into it without doing all the pre-pod blurb that we do.
Okay.
So let's just have a very, very quick recap on episode 3, which is very much around your it was the secrets, lies, and deceit that we were talking about, and kind of the buying of the alcohol, use of getting your receipts but sticking them in the bin straight away, not using loyalty cards as well, just in case they kind of tracked your buying habits and you ended up with, like, overwhelmed with promotional offers for vodka. Not taking the same routes to work and dropping your bottles in various different places en route to work that weren't the same, so careful about the routines, but also kind of planning around your hiding places while you're in the house, and where would be best to keep your alcohol so that you can kind of maintain your consumption without being found out. What we didn't get to on the last episode, which was part of this subject, was when you've got the secrets and lies and deceit, actually there's a receiving end of that. You're not just lying to yourself, but you've got a wife and you've got your parents that lived close by and you've got brothers and you're lying to them.
Yes.
And, we thought, if we're going to really do justice to this topic, then we have to address the impact this has on them. Yeah. So that's where we're going. That's where this episode is going to be based. So let's start with Mrs. Butler straight away.
Yeah.
Do you think she had an inkling at all?
She had an inkling, and in discussions we've had in my sobriety and in the early weeks of 2018, I finished drinking in December 2017. With conversations with her and with my mum, that they both knew something was going on, but what they both subsequently said was they had no idea how bad it was. My wife was in discussion, or had discussed. She knew something was wrong with her parents. She discussed it with her closest friends, but no one knew the magnitude. No one knew I was drinking up to a litre of vodka a day, topped up with strong cider. No, they knew something was wrong. I was having anxiety attacks, panic attacks. I was carrying on like a complete twat most of the time. So something was definitely up. But obviously, as an addict, I did everything in my powers to deflect away from the fact that it was due to my huge volumes of alcohol consumption.
Okay. So they knew something was up, and did they put it down to alcohol? Well, or, in my mind, I guess people will go to catastrophic areas where they think there might be an issue, and often relationship-wise, like if there's evidence of drinking, then they'll think it's drinking. But if there's secrets and lies and kind of suspicious activity, they may have thought that you were, playing away.
Yeah, well, I think because you know, we will need to address, or I should address, is there's something called Raynaud's disease, which is a blood circulation. You'll probably understand that my grandfather and my mum suffered with, and that's the only reason my cholesterol problems flagged up, because I went for some tests because I was struggling in my day-to-day work. I deal with the irrigation system, or dealt with the irrigation. My hands were getting wet, and I couldn't cope with the pain in my hands. So that's when the blood work started, and that's when the lies and everything really started, because obviously these blood tests were coming back with hugely abnormal results that must have been due to my alcohol consumption. And I did everything to lie about that. And then as my anxiety increased, that became the major medical concern with me, and in a sense deflected away from, or I then learnt that I could play on that with regards to my mental state that was obviously fragile. I think would have been. I think I've suffered from that probably as a youngster. But it was very easy to blame the anxiety. I was on an antidepressant called citalopram for a period of time, at various doses. So that became my go-to, fib, although I was suffering, but I must have been suffering greatly because of what I was doing, all my alcohol consumption and the effect of everything we discussed in episode 3. So I've waffled a bit there, but
no, and it does make sense. And now I'm just trying to think about it from the other perspective, that if there was, I'd like to think that if I was in a position where I think there's something wrong with my wife, or there's suspicious activity, that I would address it. However, when you add in the complexity of things like kind of suffering with an anxiety and you're on antidepressants and those sorts of things, there's almost like an obstacle in the way of addressing certain things, because if it becomes a volatile conversation, that's not going to help your mental health.
No.
I know, so I'm not. I don't know. That's me just speculating, I guess. But I guess we'll never know unless we're able to, have your wife on the pod. But that's for that. We're not going to do that. But I'm just trying to think about why you wouldn't just address it.
Well,
but in the way that I've just said, really, I guess.
Well, my wife attended many medical appointments with me with regards to the GP when it became a point where my mental health was the main focus of and it was all down to, sorry, I wasn't honest. And at many appointments with GPs, my wife would sit there, and I'd just tell the GP what I thought they needed to hear. And my wife would be sat next to me and said, but this isn't helping, because I live with this man every day. And I'm explaining to the doctor, my wife is backing me up and saying that is correct. And the doctor is saying, well, is he doing this or is he doing that? What I was doing was getting pissed out of my face every day, but I wasn't telling anyone. My mum attended a medical appointment with me. She sat outside of the room with a specialist, and this was down to the Raynaud's disease. And the doctor looked at some blood work I'd had done, and he said, Mr. Butler, I think you drink too much alcohol and you've got a very fatty diet. I didn't have a fatty diet, but I drank too much alcohol. I got in the car and said to my mum, I'm never going to go and see that man again. He was horrible to me. And I never did go back. I stopped going to those appointments. They sent me follow-up letters. I got 3 follow-up letters, and the 4th one said, we've taken you off the list because you've unattended. That was easy.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we kind of get a picture around, because you're not drinking in front of your wife and your family, but what you are, the volume is hidden.
Yeah.
So I guess that's different from people who claim not to be big drinkers or drinkers at all.
Yeah.
And nobody sees them drinking, but actually, you might have a couple of ciders in the evening, but you're topping up with the stronger stuff. Okay. One of the things that we wanted to talk about, we kind of touched on it a little bit when you have a newborn in the house. Yeah. And we talked about it in the context of, friendships changed when you've got kids, and the nature of those friendships change a little bit, and blah 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 blah. I guess that's more about the going out perspective, but there's a flip side to that. Is when you've got a newborn, you can't get people out of your house, and they're all well-intentioned and well-meaning, and they love a newborn, and then fucking smell the child's head and eat all your food and all the rest of it. But they are just living in your house for weeks, aren't they?
Well, my wife's parents actually rented a flat close to us when our daughter was born. They lived away at the time. So, yeah, they were here a lot. And that was a dark period in my relationship with them, because it drove me flipping up the wall, coming home from work to a house full of people when it delayed my drinking.
Yeah. So, okay. So you say it was a dark time. In what way? Not just how did that manifest, I guess, rather than it delayed your drinking. We'll come on to that in a minute. But how did that manifest?
Manifested itself in me becoming an absolute arsehole to absolutely everyone in my life. I was generally being an arsehole at work, but I could get away with that because I spent a lot of time on my own. And I could avoid getting in too much trouble, because if I wasn't very nice to someone, I'd stop my cap in hand, sorry. And to a point, we touched it before, that was my general mood in my working life anyway. And I used to play up to it. I used to enjoy that sort of role that I played within certain teams. But when it came to the home life, I would come home and just be rude and horrible. And I mean horrible, to the point where my wife would, not ask people to leave, but it was just easier for people to make their excuses and sort of get out of my way, in a sense. I was horrible, absolutely horrible. But not more in that I'd come through the door and not acknowledge people and just go upstairs and sit in the spare room until people left. It might be an hour and a half sometimes. And as soon as they left, I'd come downstairs, and me and my wife would have a small, disagreement about my behaviour. I knew I was in the wrong, but it had got rid of. And it's horrible to say, isn't it? It's not a pleasant thing to look back on. Sometimes I'd go upstairs and sip alcohol up there, reasonably safe in the knowledge that everyone was chatting downstairs. But yeah, that was.
Yeah. So. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, mate. I'm there.
Okay. Let me just. Okay. I'll just make a note of that time, because we might need to edit that out. So I guess I'm just kind of working on something that just kind of occurred to me. It might be a really clumsy analogy, so shoot me down in flames if this is the case. So we talked about in one of the episodes about kind of this functioning label, which is not always helpful, but we kind of settled on accepting, for the purpose of this podcast, talking around a functioning alcoholic, in that you're able to get on with your life, go to work, put your drinking to one side until your responsibilities of the day are done, and then you could crack onto it. And the analogy that's just kind of burst into my head a little bit is like that, those bloody holiday makers that want to go away in the sun on a 4 or 5 hour flight, which means they can't have a cigarette for 5, 6, 7 hours. And the first thing they do as soon as they arrive in Tenerife, the doors aren't even open on that front, and they're just smoking away because their addiction has got them to that point. And I guess there were parallels with, you've got to the point where you've been at the course all day, you've worked your ass off, you're coming home, and opening the door is like, it's the same sort of thing. It's like, I'm ready for my drink now because I've been forced to abstain all this time.
Yeah.
And delaying that puts you in the shittest mood.
Yes, and I didn't realise it at the time. When I look back, that's obviously what the problem was. I mean, I'll be perfectly honest, I've never been great with, when I come home from work, I just need 20, 25 minutes. Everyone can say, oh, look at Stu, look at poor old Stu, he needs 25. I'm sorry, I just do. That's just me. I don't work well when I get in from work and there's people. Yeah, I don't know. I will apologise for that, but that's just me. And if I have that 25 minutes, I'm back to being the pretty nice guy I normally am. But when, in those periods, if I come through the door and anyone was here, it was like, oh my God. And I'd got to I'd never experienced it before because I'd probably, my timeline is a bit muddled in my head. I'd probably got to the point where before our daughter was born that I was indulging in a little bit of after work drinking. My wife was at work. And obviously, as soon as our daughter was born, my wife was at home for 6 months. I lost that. My window then went to the evening, but I had ways round that, in a quiet house. My wife would have been busy with our newborn, so I could have snuck a drink. But when there's a house full of people, that wasn't really an option. And I got to be honest, I just didn't want to deal with the people. I was at a bad point mentally then, and I didn't deal with it well, and I never found a way to deal with it then. It was bad.
Yeah, I think the not kind of reducing the impact or anything of what you've just described, but people needing time when they get home from work is not uncommon. I always needed that. And sometimes, like, if you've got a long car journey or, up to an hour's car journey coming home, that's often for a lot of people their lot of steam time. You have a good song in the car on the way home. And actually, I've struggled during COVID because I'm now a home worker. I'm based at home. So I open the door that's behind me and I've got the whole family ready. They're like, sometimes they're like puppies. They want to have a chat and they want my attention, and they don't understand sometimes that I need that half an hour decompression from one room to another. So it's not, I think a lot of people will appreciate that is not an uncommon need for a lot of people. But I think when you then start layering it with part of that need for space is also to start your evening off.
Yes.
It kind of, I guess that's why why you feel that your mood and behavior was as bad as it was. Yeah. Okay, so this is going to be, I guess, it's an equally difficult question to ask as it is to answer, I guess. So, your wife's been off work for 6 months. You've got a newborn in the house.
Yes.
Do you feel like you were actively participating as a dad?
The honest answer is no. I was always present because, I wasn't always present, but my working day, in the summer, I can be done by 1 o'clock sometimes. Our daughter was born the last day of June, so that's summer baby. So I would have been home by 2 o'clock at the latest. So I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time, and I would come home from work, I would be present in the house, but I wasn't present as a father very much. I left most of it down to my wife, sadly. I did what I had to. I made the effort when I really thought I had to, if I'd had a bad day before, if I'd been really bad the day before, mood wise or hangover wise, whatever, I would try and make amends in a very small way. But no, if you follow my socials, you'll understand that I interact with Becca, the Canadian lady, the Unashamed Alcoholic. She's well worth a follow. Her podcast is fantastic. And she often describes how, she used to cut short bath time or bedtime or story time with her children. Very much the same. Our daughter was a newborn, but sadly, I almost found myself, our daughter used to fall asleep on a bottle of milk, like I assume most babies do. And if you can imagine me in my head tilting that bottle of milk to get it into her quicker because I wanted to have a drink. When she was in bed, and let's be honest here, that was rare if I was doing the milk, but the occasions I did do it, in my head would just be racing. If I had to do anything after our daughter was in bed, well, let's use something silly, do the dishes, water the tomatoes. I'd be going 100 mile an hour because I needed that drink, or wanted. Let's say, not say needed, wanted. Probably did need, but it was, that the alcohol was the focus, the direction, the goal.
Yeah. And so did that also impact then? So this is kind of around the house and trying to get stuff done as quickly as possible. But one of those things that you have to, I do love my children, of course I do. But sometimes it can become a chore when you've got newborns and it's like, oh, we've got to go out. Let's go for a nice walk around the park, or let's go to the zoo. And they're 6 months old. They don't know what a tiger is. But I am a bit curmudgeonly in my old age, I've got to say. But were you attending those sorts of things with your wife, or your wife would go and see friends or go to the park, the zoo, wherever on her own, and you would find a reason not to?
Bare minimum, like I said in the previous conversation, I did the bare minimum. I would attend the bare minimum social gatherings. I would attend the bare minimum family functions. I did the bare minimum. I would do certain things, or I'd go to the park, go to the beach, and I'd go with my bottom lip dragging along the floor. But let's just put a number on it. 2 out of 10 times I'd be in attendance. Pretty piss poor.
And from your wife's point of view, was there just the general acceptance that you're unlikely to come, and it'll be, and if you did come, did you make a nuisance of yourself? In respect,
yeah.
You didn't.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
I'd kick my feet. Stomp my feet. Again, I would, refer him back to the anxiety. I could hide behind that and did. My wife had periods where she wouldn't ask because it was probably easier not to, and then she'd have times where she was really good, and she was always really good, but she would try and coax me out, gently approach, and that was almost the hardest, when someone's being nice to you and they've got their best intentions, but in your heart you're still going to say no and let them down. And I would gently say no, because and let's, if my wife said, shall we go down the beach? My brain would say, if I say no, I know she's going to be out the house for an hour, and that's drinking time. Yeah.
Okay. How old is your daughter now?
5. She's just turned 5.
Okay, and you've not been drinking for 3 years, did you say, or 4?
December 17th this year will be 4 years. No, December 18th. I had my last drink December 17, 2017.
Right. Okay, so what I'm getting at really is that that period with some significant regret, but you've been sober for the last 4 years, and she's still very, very young, so there is plenty of time to make up for lost time with that, isn't there? So,
Yeah.
and I've met your daughter, and she is the cutest, most polite. I'm sure she's on her best behaviour and everything, but she was lush, mate. So that was a treat to meet her actually. And there's you've got plenty of years of spoiling her rotten.
Yeah, it's I'm lucky. Let's touch wood, and we never go back to alcohol. But she would never be. I was drinking when she was alive, but she will never remember drunk daddy with any luck. Yeah,
and that's that's a blessing, I guess.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, we did say this might be a bit of a shorter episode. I think we were more keen to have a shorter episode that followed a regular episode rather than making a bumper one, because people just won't listen to an hour more than listening. So we've kind of got to the end really of what I wanted to delve into without it getting too personal, and that's not where this podcast goes. Unless there's anything else that you wanted to bring up or talk about or throw into the mix.
No, there's a couple of points that we probably could have mentioned earlier. When you asked, or when I discussed that, when what had happened with my drinking became apparent, and my mum and my wife sort of said that they knew something was wrong, but they had no idea how big a scale my addiction was. There was just a couple of good friends of mine, I won't mention their names, but when it came out, I remember having a conversation with a very good friend of mine, and he said, "Do you know what?" He said, "I phoned you up," and he phoned me up to tell me some, very good news, a pregnancy news, and he said, "I could have sworn you were pissed on that phone call." It was like 2 o'clock. But he said, "I was in the car with my wife, and it was on loudspeaker, and we both said you were drunk, but it was 1:30 in the afternoon, Stu, so you couldn't have been drunk." I said, "Oh, I was drunk. I would have been drunk." I said, I could just about remember the phone call, but the penny." A lot of people had their suspicions, but no one knew. And whether that's you don't want to say I was a very good liar, but I was obviously pretty good at hiding what I did. So it's probably, I don't want anyone to listen to this podcast and think, why didn't anyone intervene? Because people tried to help me along the way. So many people tried to help me, and I kicked back at every given opportunity. So anyone listening, please don't think that people didn't try and help me. Short of being caught, as we discussed in episode 3, short of being caught by the police, that might have stopped me, but it didn't happen. And any other times that I got in significant trouble, I sat there in front of my doctor and lied through my teeth on 10 occasions with my wife sat next to me. People tried to help me for a long time. So just to put that out there.
Yeah, no, I think it is a good point, because although we're taking a deeper look at kind of some of the subject areas that you covered in your blog, we're never really going to be able to add the vivid colour of the lived experience while we recollect as we go through this pod, because that lived experience will have so many raw emotions and so many things that actually you just might not remember. So I think we have to. Well, it's a good point. I think it's well understood as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Okay then. Well, for about the 5th time tonight, I'll say cheerio to Stu. As it's been one of those evenings with some technological glitches as well. But no, it's been a really eye-opening kind of run through on these episode 3 and 4. And again, I think we're just grateful that you're willing and prepared to share as much as you do. But everybody, just feel free to reach out at Stu Butts on Twitter, or HWOM if you want to throw forward a question, and we'll get Stu to answer it and work through kind of that scenario for you. Yes. But until then, Stu, thank you very much. have a good rest of the evening and rest of the week, and we'll probably catch up over the weekend or early next week for the next episode.
Yeah, same to you, Phil. Thanks, mate. That's been really good this evening. Cheers, buddy.
Cool. Take care.
And you.